On my 22nd birthday, my parents sold my entire collection of vintage industrial machines to fund my sister's bedroom renovation. When I told my mother she'd sold my livelihood, she said, "It's just old junk taking up space." So I emptied the entire warehouse that same night. This morning, my father walked into the storage facility to find every single piece of equipment gone. And now they're realizing they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The day started with the familiar rumble of machinery in the distance, a sound that had become my morning meditation. It was my 22nd birthday, though we'd agreed to postpone any celebration. My younger sister, Sophia, had finals coming up, and my mother, Diane, insisted we shouldn't create any distractions. I didn't mind. All I wanted was a quiet evening, a cold beer, and a few hours working on the 1952 Bridgeport mill I'd been restoring for months. My warehouse wasn't just storage. It was my empire. It wasn't the decrepit metal shed that came with my grandfather's old property. It was a fully climate-controlled, professionally organized 5,000-square-foot facility that I'd built from the ground up over the last 4 years. It was where I stopped being a disappointment and started being Marcus Chen, master machinist and vintage equipment restorer. It was where I built a business that could roar. I pushed open the heavy steel door, expecting the familiar scent of cutting oil and metal. Instead, I was met with echoing silence and the faint smell of diesel exhaust. The space was empty. My breath caught in my throat. "No," I whispered, hitting the overhead lights. The fluorescent banks hummed to life, illuminating a cavernous void. My machine shop was gone. My restoration bay was empty. My parts inventory wall was stripped bare. And the machines. God, the machines. My 1940s Cincinnati lathe, gone. My complete set of vintage milling equipment, gone. My grandfather's irreplaceable 1938 South Bend lathe, the one he'd used to make parts for World War II aircraft, gone. The entire facility had been gutted. Every piece of equipment, every tool, every carefully cataloged vintage motor and transmission, all of it vanished. A cold, sick feeling washed over me, far worse than any hangover. I ran back to my truck, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. My parents, Richard and Diane, and my sister Sophia, were at the house, probably celebrating her upcoming room renovation, the project they'd been talking about nonstop for weeks. I burst through the front door, my heart pounding. "Where are my machines?" The conversation stopped. My father, Richard, looked up from his tablet, his expression completely unbothered. He carefully set down his reading glasses. "Ah, Marcus, good. We were wondering when you'd notice." "Notice?" My voice was shaking. "The warehouse is empty. Where is everything? Where are my machines?" My mother, Diane, shifted uncomfortably, picking at her manicured nails. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophia, the golden child, barely looked up from her phone, scrolling through interior design posts as if I'd interrupted her favorite show. "We sold it," Richard said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact, the same tone he used in his corporate attorney meetings. "We got an excellent price for the lot. It all went to an industrial equipment dealer this afternoon." I couldn't process the words. "You sold it. All of it. My machines. My grandfather's lathe." "Don't be dramatic, Marcus," Diane said, finally looking at me with those cold, practical eyes. "They're just old machines. You don't need all that equipment. It was all for the family fund." The family fund. That mythical account that had only ever benefited one person in its entire existence. Sophia. My overtime checks, my savings from 3 years of working 80-hour weeks, and now, apparently, my entire business. "You sold my business," I whispered, the reality crushing my chest. Those weren't just machines. That was my livelihood. Some of those were one of a kind. They were Grandpa Joe's. Richard's face hardened. This was the part he enjoyed. The part where he got to be the authoritative father. "Your hobby wasn't practical, Marcus. Sophia's future is." She needs a proper space to study, to grow. You're 22 years old. You can buy new equipment. You're part of this family, and you will contribute. Contribute? I was shouting now, the shock turning into white-hot rage. I've been contributing. I've been working every hour I can to build that business. I've paid you rent for this entire year. You had no right. I have every right, he boomed, standing up. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. You're living in our guest house. You use our property for that warehouse. Everything you think you own is still under our authority until you're truly independent, and this machinery collection fantasy is not independence. The words hung in the air, cold and final. My mother flinched but said nothing. Sophia just kept scrolling, completely indifferent to the destruction of my life. You live on our property. It wasn't a statement. It was a weapon. He'd used that line to control my choices, my time, my money for years. He saw me as a failed investment because I'd chosen a skilled trade over law school like him. He saw my passion as wasted potential. I looked at his smug, righteous face. I looked at my mother's willful ignorance. I looked at my sister's complete apathy. And in that single terrible moment, something inside me didn't just break. It transformed. It went from molten grief into cold, sharp steel. Okay, I said. My voice was suddenly calm. So calm it surprised even me. Richard blinked, expecting more yelling. Okay, good. I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. He sat back down, picking up his tablet. Now, your mother made lasagna. Sit down and eat. We can talk about getting you some basic tools from Harbor Freight next week. I didn't move. I just stared at him. He had sold my past and my future for a few $1,000s to create a princess bedroom for his favorite child. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. No, thank you, I said. I'm not hungry. I turned around, walked out to the guest house, and locked the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled my duffel bag out from the closet. I didn't know it yet, but my father had just made the worst business decision of his life. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute. It was almost clarifying. It was worse than any argument, worse than any punishment. It was a fundamental rejection of who I was, and it would be the last one I ever accepted. The first hour in the guest house was a vacuum. The shock was so profound that my body went numb, a defense mechanism against the sheer scale of the violation. I sat on the edge of my bed, duffel bag at my feet, and just stared. I saw the cheap IKEA furniture my mother had chosen, the beige walls. This place had never been mine. Not really. It was just temporary housing, a place I was allowed to sleep while my real life existed in the warehouse. And they had sold it. They had invited strangers into my workspace, my professional facility, and let them haul away my life piece by piece while I was at a job site across town. They had sold my grandfather's tools, the ones he'd placed in my hands when I was 12, his weathered fingers guiding mine over the smooth ways of a perfectly maintained lathe. They had sold the custom fabrication equipment I'd saved for 2 years to buy. They had sold my dream for the price of a bedroom set. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Sophia. I ignored it. It buzzed again. A text. Sophia. Dad's upset. Just come apologize so we can have a normal evening. You're ruining your own birthday. Ruining? I almost laughed. It was a bitter, harsh sound in the quiet room. My birthday. They had done this on my birthday. The cruelty of it was surgical. A soft knock came at the door. Marcus, honey, please open the door. My mother's voice. Soft, pleading, and completely useless. Go away, Mom. Don't be like this, she said, her voice wheedling. Your father, he's just trying to do what's best for the family. You know how much pressure he's under with Sophia's education expenses. He didn't mean to upset you. He didn't mean to. I was on my feet, my hands clenched. He sold tens of thousands of dollars of my property without my permission. That's not upsetting me, Mom. That's theft. Oh, don't use that word, she hissed, her voice suddenly sharp. That's a terrible, ugly word, Marcus. We are a family. It's all family assets. You'll understand when you're older. Now please come out. You're making a scene, and Sophia needs to focus on her exams. Sophia. It was always Sophia. Sophia, the 19-year-old architecture student, the princess, the one our family's entire existence revolved around. Her future was the only one that mattered. Her needs were the only ones that were real. My future, the one I was building with my own hands, the one I was already succeeding in, was just a hobby because it involved grease and heavy lifting instead of drafting tables and expensive degrees. I'm not coming out, I said, my voice flat. There was a long, frustrated sigh from the other side of the door. Fine, she said, her tone martyred. Stay in there and sulk. But you're only hurting yourself. Your father is a practical man, Marcus. You know he did what had to be done. The footsteps retreated. I was alone again. I looked at my phone. A new text from Sophia. Sophia, whatever. If you're going to be immature, I'm going to the library to study. Don't ruin Dad's mood more than you already have. I need him to co-sign my student apartment lease. My blood ran cold. A student apartment. So the bedroom renovation wasn't even for studying at home. It was just for her to have a perfect space when she visited on weekends. They had destroyed my livelihood for aesthetics. They had burned my future for interior design. I stood up and began to pack. Not with frantic panic, but with methodical precision. I packed my clothes, my toiletries, the few personal items I owned, and the small fireproof box that held my birth certificate, passport, and business documents. My father, Richard, was a practical man. My mother, Diane, was his enabler. My sister, Sophia, was the black hole they fed. They were a closed system, and I was the only asset they could liquidate. Richard believed he had taken everything of value. He had sold my machines, my equipment, my tools. In his mind, case closed. He had converted a hobby into cash and solved his problem. But as I zipped the duffel bag, a slow, cold smile touched my lips. My father, the corporate attorney, was an expert in contracts and assets. He understood quarterly reports and billable hours. But he was an amateur at what I did. He was sloppy. He'd gone into my warehouse, taken the obvious, impressive machines, and hadn't looked any deeper. He'd left the most valuable things behind. They had sold the machines, yes, but they had forgotten about the parts inventory. They had forgotten about the massive, carefully curated collection of rare vintage components I kept in the climate-controlled back room. They didn't know the difference between a box of random bolts and a complete set of 1940s precision ground gears worth more than a new car. They'd forgotten about the engines. The 12 fully restored vintage motors I'd been holding for a collector in Europe. The specialty fabrication dies. The proprietary tooling I'd been commissioned to create. They'd forgotten what I was capable of moving, and they'd forgotten who I learned from. They'd forgotten about Tommy. I picked up my phone. It wasn't my sister or my mother I was going to call. I dialed the number of my mentor, the man who'd been more of a father to me than Richard had ever been. Tommy, I said, my voice steady. I need your help, and I need your truck. My parents just sold my machines. There was a pause, and then a low, dangerous voice on the other end. They what? I'm on my way. My father, Richard, always said he respected hard work, but what he meant was white-collar work. He understood billable hours. My passion for machining was, in his eyes, beneath our family name. You get dirty, he'd say. I get bonuses. See the difference? He was a corporate attorney, a man who spent his days in conference rooms assigning value to mergers and acquisitions. He was practical to the point of being cruel, and he saw no return on investment in my chosen trade. My sister Sophia was the opposite. She was Richard's masterpiece. Sophia was 19, enrolled in a prestigious architecture program, and possessed an effortless charm that made people want to give her everything. The family fund was established the day she got her acceptance letter. From that moment on, the entire family's financial gravity shifted to orbit around her. My mother, Diane, took on freelance graphic design work, her fingers flying across her tablet to pay for Sophia's art supplies. My father canceled his golf club membership and delayed the kitchen renovation, all to ensure Sophia's tuition was paid on time. And me? I was the family's secondary income stream. My journey into machining hadn't been a hobby, it was an inheritance. My grandfather, my mother's father, had been a master machinist in the old country. He was a quiet, precise man who smelled of cutting oil and steel. When I was 12, he placed his smallest micrometer in my hand and said, "The metal already knows what it wants to be, Marcus. You just have to listen." He passed away 3 years later, leaving me his entire workshop. The tools were worn smooth by his hands, stained with 40 years of work. They were priceless. To my father, they were just old junk taking up garage space. When I started my apprenticeship with Tommy, the most respected machinist in the tri-state area, Richard was baffled. "You're going to be a grease monkey for minimum wage when you could be getting a business degree?" He didn't understand that the minimum wage was just the start. I worked 50 hours a week for Tommy, learning the craft. Then I'd go to construction sites on weekends, doing whatever paid, saving every dollar. Every penny went into my future. I bought my first lathe secondhand. I saved for 18 months to get a professional-grade milling machine. I spent a year building my warehouse facility, insulating it, wiring it, installing a complex HVAC system to protect the delicate machinery. My family saw none of this. They just saw the warehouse door close. When I'd come home exhausted and covered in metal shavings, my mother would sigh, "I just wish you'd spend more time with us, Marcus. Your sister's home for the weekend. Can't you just be normal for a night?" Normal? To them, normal meant contributing to the bottomless pit of Sophia's ambitions. Last year, when Sophia needed a new high-end drawing tablet and drafting equipment for her studies, Richard had suggested I sell my truck. It was an old F-150, but it was my truck, the one I used to haul equipment and get to job sites. "It's just practical, Marcus," Richard had explained as if I were a child. "Sophia needs this for her career. You can use public transportation. It's a small sacrifice for the family." I fought him. I fought him hard. But Diane wore me down. "Please, honey, don't upset your father. It's just for a little while. Think of how proud we'll be when Sophia is a famous architect." I caved. I sold the truck. Sophia got her equipment. I started using Uber and bumming rides, adding hours to my already crushing schedule. And Sophia? She used the tablet to watch Netflix and play design games. This was the pattern. My sacrifices were expected. Sophia's demands were investments. Now, sitting in the guest house with my bag packed, I understood the full ugly truth. My father didn't just resent my career choice. He resented me. He resented that I was building something independent of him. He resented that I had a passion he couldn't quantify in a spreadsheet. And he resented most of all that I had something of value that he could take. Selling my machines wasn't a last resort. It was a power play. It was his way of reminding me that he was in control, that my dreams were disposable, and that my only value was as a resource for his golden child. He had ripped the heart out of my world to pawn it for his daughter's comfort. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about practicality, but all he'd done was confirm what I'd suspected for years. In this family, I wasn't a son. I was collateral. The headlights of a massive truck swept across the guest house window. Tommy was here. I grabbed my bag, took out my keys, and walked into the main house one last time. The house was quiet. My parents were in the living room. The murmur of the television a familiar backdrop. Sophia was probably still at the library, blissfully unaware that her future was now funded by the theft of mine. I placed my house keys on the kitchen counter. Next to them, I laid a single, simple note. I didn't write it in anger. I wrote it with the cold, clear precision of one of my grandfather's measurements. "You sold my machines. I kept my future. Don't contact me." I walked out the back door, closing it softly behind me. I didn't look back. I climbed into the cab of Tommy's truck. The smell of diesel and coffee, a welcome comfort. "He's going to regret this," Tommy said, his voice a low growl. He put the truck in gear. "I know," I said. "Let's go. We have work to do." The rage didn't hit me until we were on the highway. It came in a sudden, blinding wave, so intense it made me shake. It wasn't the hot, yelling rage I'd felt in the house. This was cold, crystalline fury. It was the fury of the violated, the betrayed. But under it, something new was forming. Resolve. He didn't just sell the machines, Tommy, I said, my voice tight. He sold the custom fabrication equipment I built from scratch, the climate control system, the parts inventory. He let strangers pick my life apart. Tommy gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and hands like worn leather. He was a master, and he'd seen my potential from day one. He'd become the father Richard never was. "He's a fool, Marcus," Tommy said. "A destructive, ignorant fool, but he's also sloppy. What did he miss?" "Everything," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "He missed everything that matters." We pulled into a 24-hour equipment rental lot. "I need a 26-foot box truck," Tommy said to the sleepy-eyed clerk, "and a forklift attachment, 2 heavy-duty dollies, and a pallet jack." He paid in cash. An hour later, we were parked 3 streets away from the warehouse property. "I can't let them see your truck," I explained. "We need help." "I know," Tommy said, looking at the dark warehouse. "Called in some favors while you were packing." Just then, 3 more trucks pulled up. It was 5 guys from the Machinists' Union, friends of mine and Tommy's. They were big, skilled, and after hearing a 1-minute version of the story, quietly furious. "We work in silence," I said, handing them all gloves. "We park in the back lot. We use my access code. We take everything they missed." For the next 4 hours, we operated like a professional crew. We backed the truck to the rear loading dock, killing the lights. We used the pallet jacks and forklifts to move the heavy equipment. First, the parts inventory. 12 pallets of precision vintage components, each worth thousands. Then the specialty tooling that was custom-made for specific jobs. Then the engines. 12 fully restored vintage motors, each one a masterpiece, each one already sold to collectors overseas. And then the grand prize. I walked to the climate-controlled back room and entered the security code. Inside was my real treasure. To someone like my father, it looked like shelves of random parts. To a machinist, it was a vault. There were complete sets of vintage precision grinding wheels, never used, worth more than a luxury car. There were drawers of carbide cutting tools, each one irreplaceable. There were boxes of specialty bearings, vintage gauges, and measurement equipment that couldn't be manufactured anymore. One by one, we loaded them into the truck, handling them with more care than most people handle fine china. We took the shelving units. We took the climate control equipment. We took my business back. By 4 a.m., the warehouse was a shell. It was exactly as it had been when I first leased it. An empty concrete box. We drove to Tommy's facility, a massive industrial complex 40 miles away. We unloaded everything into his secure storage building. When the last piece was in place, the sun was just starting to tint the sky pink. The guys from the union, true professionals, just nodded, accepted my whispered, grateful thanks, and drove off into the dawn. Tommy put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You're safe here, Marcus. There's an apartment above the shop. It's yours, as long as you need it." "Thank you, Tommy," I whispered, exhaustion and adrenaline finally catching up. "Now," he said, handing me a hot cup of coffee from a thermos. "Let's find your machines." This was the clever trap. My father, Richard, was an attorney. He knew how to negotiate deals and draft contracts. But he wasn't a specialist. He didn't know the industrial equipment community. It's a small, tight-knit world. There are only a handful of dealers in the region who would even recognize vintage machinery, let alone have the capital to buy an entire collection. At 8 a.m., sharp, Tommy and I sat in his office, a list of phone numbers between us. "You call the scrapyards," he said. "Ask about recent vintage equipment purchases. I'll call the dealers. I'll start with Morrison." Morrison Industrial Equipment was the biggest, most reputable dealer in 3 states. Mr. Morrison and Tommy had a 35-year history of friendly rivalry and mutual respect. I spent an hour getting nowhere with scrapyard operators who had no idea what a Bridgeport mill was. As I was hanging up with another confused manager, I heard Tommy's voice in the other room, his tone suddenly iron. "What do you mean, Gerald?" A pause. He said his son gave up the business. Another pause. Yes, that's him. No, he's right here. He's my apprentice. He told you they were his to sell? A longer pause. I see, Gerald. That man didn't just sell you his son's equipment. He sold you stolen property. His father's collection was in that lot. They are irreplaceable. There was a long pause. I held my breath. I understand your position, Tommy said, his voice cold. And you understand mine. That man, Richard, has committed fraud. He has defrauded you, and he has stolen from my apprentice. No, I don't want you to call the police. Not yet. I have a better idea. Tell me, Gerald, when does he come in to collect the payment? The morning exploded. I was in the apartment above Tommy's shop, which was quickly becoming my new home. It was spartanly furnished, but the entire place smelled like cutting oil and coffee, a scent that felt safer than anywhere I'd ever lived. My phone, which I'd left on silent, was lit up like a switchboard. 23 missed calls from my mother, 12 from Richard, a stream of increasingly hysterical texts from Sophia. Sophia, 7:15 a.m. Where are you? Mom's freaking out. Sophia, 7:40 a.m. Seriously, Marcus, this isn't funny. Dad just went to the warehouse. He's calling his lawyer. Sophia, 7:41 a.m. He's threatening to sue you. You'd better get back here and return his property. Sophia, 7:42 a.m. His property, Marcus. This is theft. Sophia, 8:10 a.m. Mom is crying. You've really done it this time. You are the most selfish person I have ever met. Dad is driving to your work to talk to your boss. The last one made my blood run cold. I ran downstairs. Tommy, my father is on his way here. Tommy was on the phone, a grim look on his face. He held up a hand, silencing me. Gerald, he said. He's on his way to my shop right now. He thinks Marcus is here. Perfect. Let him come. It saves us a trip. No, just stay where you are. I'll handle this. He hung up and looked at me. Gerald Morrison is on his way. He's not happy. It seems your father not only sold him your equipment, but he also sold him my vintage surface grinder that you'd borrowed for a project. He committed fraud against a man who owns half the industrial real estate in this state. Your father is a spectacular idiot. At that moment, a luxury sedan screeched to a halt in the gravel lot. My father's Mercedes. Richard stormed out of the car, his face purple with rage. He marched toward the shop, saw me standing in the doorway and pointed a finger. You, he roared. You think this is a game? You think you can steal from me? I'm pressing charges, Marcus. You emptied my warehouse. That is theft of my property. Tommy stepped out from behind me, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a good 6 inches taller than my father and built like the machinery he worked with. Richard, I presume, Tommy said, his voice a calm, deep rumble. My father faltered, his bravado shrinking in the face of this imposing stranger. Who are you? I'm Tommy, he said, Marcus's mentor, and you are on my property, yelling at my apprentice. You need to lower your voice. I will not, Richard sputtered, regaining a fraction of his courage. She stole my equipment, my inventory. I am here to get them back. Your equipment? I asked, stepping forward. My voice was ice. You mean the 1940s precision tooling? Or the vintage motors? Tell me, Dad, what exactly did you plan to do with them? Display them in Sophia's new bedroom? Richard's face went blank. He had no idea what I was talking about. It's equipment. It was in my warehouse. It was in my warehouse, I corrected him. The one I leased with my money, the equipment I purchased with my paychecks. You don't get to sell my business and keep my inventory. He was losing control, his narrative collapsing. You live on my property. That makes it my asset. That's the law. Is it? A new voice cut through the tension. A black Range Rover had pulled silently into the lot. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. This was Gerald Morrison. He looked calm, collected, and absolutely lethal. Mr. Chen? Morrison asked, though it wasn't a question. Yes, my father said, puffing up his chest, sensing a potential ally. This boy, my son, he stole... Mr. Chen, Morrison interrupted. his voice like silk over steel. "My name is Gerald Morrison. You visited my facility yesterday. You sold me a collection of industrial equipment." A flicker of panic crossed Richard's face. This was not going as planned. "I did. A fine collection. My son's, as I said. He gave up the business." "That's interesting," Morrison said, taking a step closer. "Because Marcus here is one of the most promising machinists in the region, and his boss, Tommy, is my oldest competitor and friend. What's also interesting is that the collection you sold me contained several pieces that belonged to Marcus's grandfather, which he can prove, and it also contained a vintage surface grinder that belongs to Tommy, which he can also prove." Richard turned a shade of pale gray. "You lied to me, Mr. Chen," Morrison said, his voice dangerously pleasant. "You came into my business and you sold me stolen property. That is fraud. That is a felony. My father's first instinct was to lash out, not at Morrison, but at me. You set me up," he shrieked, pointing at me. "This is your fault. You're trying to ruin me." "You did a fine job of that yourself," Tommy said, crossing his arms. I'll give the money back," Richard stammered, looking at Morrison. "It's a misunderstanding, a family matter. We are long past misunderstandings," Morrison said. "I paid you $42,000 for that collection, which I've now discovered is worth nearly $80,000, meaning you are as incompetent as you are criminal. But I'm not a man who likes complications. I want my $42,000 back. Now. Now? I can't," Richard said, his eyes wide. "It's in the family fund. It's for my daughter's education. It's already spent." "That sounds," Morrison said, pulling out his phone, "like a you problem. I, on the other hand, am about to have a calling the authorities solution." "No!" Richard shouted. The panic was real now. "No police, please. I need to make a call. I can move funds. I just need an hour." Morrison looked at Tommy. Tommy looked at me. "He doesn't get an hour," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I didn't get an hour. I didn't even get a warning. You pay him back. You pay him back right now." My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. He had been cornered. The powerful attorney, the man in charge, had been trapped by his own practical theft. "Fine," he hissed, pulling out his phone and opening his banking app. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely type. "You've ruined this family, Marcus. I hope you're happy. You've just stolen your sister's future." The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. "No, Dad," I said as he furiously transferred the funds. "I just saved mine." The $42,000 vanished from my father's account with a digital swoosh. Morrison's phone pinged. He checked it, nodded once, and put it back in his pocket. "A pleasure doing business with you, Richard," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The equipment will be delivered back to this address." He gestured to Tommy's shop. "Within the hour. If you ever, and I mean ever, step foot in my facility again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." He gave a polite nod to Tommy and me, got in his Range Rover, and was gone. My father stood in the gravel lot, vibrating with a level of impotent rage I had never seen. He was a deflated bully, his authority stripped bare. He opened his mouth, probably to let loose a final wounding volley of insults. I just held up my hand. "Don't," I said. "Don't say another word. Get in your car and go home." "Marcus, you don't understand what you've done," he whispered, his voice broken. That was everything. That was Sophia's entire year. And the $42,000 you got for my equipment was my entire business. I shot back. "We are not the same. You did this to teach me a lesson." "Well, lesson learned. Now get off Tommy's property." He stared at me. A stranger. The son he thought he could control was gone. In his place was someone he didn't recognize, and more importantly, someone he couldn't manipulate. He got in his car, slammed the door, and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust. When he was gone, my knees finally buckled. Tommy caught me. "I've got you, Marcus. It's over." He He really did it, I whispered, the reality setting in. He sold it all. He did, Tommy said, guiding me into the shop. But we're getting it back. And more importantly, you are free. The rest of the day was a blur. The delivery trucks from Morrison's arrived. My machines, my equipment, my grandfather's precious tool chest. It was all there. I spent hours just touching them, taking inventory, tears of relief streaming down my face. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. But the real fallout was just beginning. My phone, which had been quiet during the confrontation, erupted. This time it wasn't my mother. It was Sophia. I answered, putting it on speaker. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "What did you do, Marcus?" "I got my equipment back, Sophia," I said calmly, wiping down a machine. "That's all." "My tuition. The payment for my apartment was declined. The entire family fund is empty. Dad said you had him arrested." "I didn't have him arrested, though I could have," I said. "He was forced to return the money he stole from me. He sold my property to a legitimate dealer under false pretenses. That's called fraud, Sophia. You're an architecture student. You should understand contracts." But that was my money," she sputtered. "That was for my future. You've ruined me. I'm going to lose my apartment. All for your stupid machines." There it was. The entitlement, raw and exposed. The belief that her future was the only one that mattered, that mine was just a hobby that could be liquidated for her convenience. "My stupid machines are my life, Sophia," I said, my voice hardening. "A life I've been building while you've been coasting. You want a future? Go get a job. I've had 3 of them since I was 16. You can start by selling that drafting equipment I paid for." She was speechless. The idea of her working was so foreign, so offensive it had short-circuited her brain. "Goodbye, Sophia," I said. "Marcus, wait. Don't hang up. You have to fix this. Talk to Dad. Tell him to sell something else. Sell your parts inventory. That's worth money, right? Dad said you stole all his equipment." I hung up. I blocked her number. Then I blocked my mother's. And finally, I blocked my father's. The silence in the shop was absolute. It was just me, my machines, and the scent of oil. But the fight wasn't quite over. That evening, as Tommy and I were closing up, my mother's car pulled into the lot. She got out, looking frail and terrified. I met her at the door, blocking her entrance. "Marcus, please," she begged, her eyes red from crying. "You have to come home. Your father, he's devastated. Sophia, she's locked in her room. This is tearing us apart." "It's not this tearing you apart, Mom," I said, my heart aching with a sadness that was deeper than anger. "It's been torn for years. I just stopped letting you all stitch it back together with pieces of me. But he's your father," she cried, as if that explained everything. "He loves you. He just makes mistakes. He's practical, that's all. He didn't understand." "He didn't want to understand," I said. "He understood that I had something of value, and he took it. And you stood by and let him. You told me to be reasonable and not make waves while he was selling my grandfather's legacy." I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't ask," I corrected her. "You never asked. You just told me to be quiet and think of Sophia. I'm done thinking of Sophia. I'm done being quiet." "What are we going to do?" she wept. "Sophia's education. Your father, he's so ashamed. He can't face his partners at the firm." "That's not my problem anymore, Mom," I said. It was the hardest sentence I'd ever spoken. "You all need to figure out how to live without me as your emergency fund. I'm sure Sophia will make a great architect if she can figure out how to pay for it. Maybe Dad can sell his Mercedes." She flinched as if I'd struck her. That, apparently, was a line too far. "You've changed, Marcus," she said, her voice turning cold. "You've become cruel." "No, Mom," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm not cruel. I'm just finally done. Goodbye." I closed the shop door, turned the deadbolt, and walked away. leaving her alone in the parking lot. A week passed. It was the most peaceful week of my life. I moved my belongings into the apartment above Tommy's shop. Tommy, seeing my drive and my renewed focus, officially promoted me from apprentice to junior partner with a significant raise. For the first time, I was breathing air that wasn't thick with resentment and obligation. My family, however, was imploding. I knew this because Tommy had a contact who worked at my father's law firm. The gossip was apparently spectacular. Richard had been taking personal days. Sophia, it was rumored, had been forced to withdraw from her architecture program for the semester and was, to the horror of the entire family, working at a Starbucks. The family fund was not just empty, it was in debt. The $42,000 I'd forced Richard to return was, it turned out, the last of their liquid assets. The sale of my equipment had been an act of pure desperation, a final unethical cash grab to keep the perfect family illusion afloat. I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a deep, hollow sadness. They had destroyed themselves. The climax didn't happen in a public showdown. It was something far quieter, and in its own way, far more devastating. It was a Saturday. I was in the shop, working on a custom fabrication project, finally using the precision equipment I had guarded for so long. The front door chimed. I looked up, and my heart stopped. It was Sophia. She looked terrible. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a wrinkled Starbucks uniform. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked tired, and for the first time in her life, humble. "Marcus," she said. She didn't sound angry. She just sounded empty. "Sophia," I said, setting down my tools. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. Tommy let me in. He's outside." She looked around the shop, at the rows of machines humming quietly, at the precision work in progress. This is really incredible. It's my life's work," I said simply. She nodded, running a hand through her hair. I didn't get it. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I just knew that I had a path, and you were just there." "I was never just there, Sophia," I said. "I was working harder than you most days." "I see that now," she said. She looked down at her own hands, soft and unmarked, then at mine, which were covered in calluses and small scars. "I'm sorry, Marcus." I stared at her. I had been prepared for more yelling, for more demands, for more entitlement. I had never, in 22 years, been prepared for an apology. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time her voice broke. "I was a brat. I was a spoiled, entitled brat. I just took, and I never even saw what you were giving up. I never saw you." Tears were rolling down her face, and they weren't the manipulative tears of a kid who'd been caught. They were real. "When the tuition payment bounced," she continued, "I thought my life was over. I screamed at you. I screamed at Dad. I screamed at Mom. And then Dad finally told me." "Told you what?" "Everything. That the family fund wasn't a fund. It was just his salary and your contributions. That he'd been covering my apartment, my car, my lifestyle, everything. That he'd taken out a second mortgage on the house 2 years ago to keep me in school. That he was going to lose everything." The air left my lungs. "Lose everything?" "He sold your equipment because the bank was threatening foreclosure," Sophia whispered. "He needed $42,000, not for my tuition, for the mortgage payment. He'd been lying to everyone, including me. He had lied. He had lied to Morrison. He had lied to Sophia. And he had lied to me. He had used her education as a cover story to hide his own catastrophic failure. He had sacrificed my future not for his daughter, but to hide his own shame. I've been such an idiot." Sophia was sobbing now, a full, ugly cry. "I told him he had to fix it. He had to tell you." The door chimed again. My father walked in. He looked 10 years older. His shoulders were slumped, his expensive suit wrinkled. He wasn't the commanding attorney. He was just a small, defeated man. He looked at me, at Sophia, and then at the floor. "She's right, Marcus," Richard said, his voice barely audible. It was for the house. I've made a disaster of everything. I was so obsessed with appearances, with looking successful. I ruined us. And I violated you in the worst way." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box. I couldn't get it all back," he said. "The dealer, he had already sold this to a private collector. I had to buy it back. I had to sell my Mercedes." He poured the contents onto a workbench. It was my grandfather's tools, the small, hand-worn precision instruments, the micrometers, the calipers. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he said, holding them out. His hand was shaking. It's not enough, but it's what I could do." I looked at the tools. I looked at my sister, who was watching me with desperate hope. I looked at my father, a man who had built his entire identity on success and was now standing before me, utterly broken. This was the climax. Not a public humiliation, but a private, devastating confession. The family fund was a lie. The golden child was a prop. And the practical man was a fraud. I took a deep breath. I walked forward, and I took the tools from his hand. My fingers closed around the familiar wooden handles of my grandfather's instruments. They felt warm, like a piece of my past returned. "Thank you," I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the silent shop. Richard seemed to shrink. "Marcus," he began, I will pay you back for the 42,000. I'm getting a night job." "Dad," Sophia said, wiping her face. "Stop." She looked at me. "We're not here to ask for anything. He had to give those back, and I had to apologize." I looked at the two of them, the man who had nearly destroyed me and the girl who had enabled him. They were different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, painful humility. This wasn't a happily ever after moment. A lifetime of resentment and betrayal couldn't be erased by one apology. The trust was not just broken, it was pulverized. "I'm glad you're working, Sophia," I said, turning to her. "It's good for you. I'm not going back to architecture school. Not for a while. I'm going to community college for business management. I need to learn how money actually works." I nodded, a spark of genuine respect. "That's a good plan." I turned to my father. "You sold my equipment. You lied to me. You lied to Sophia. You almost lost your house. And you were going to let me and Sophia believe it was her fault, all to protect your ego." He flinched, but he nodded. "Yes, that's the truth. I can't forgive you for that," I said. "Not today. Maybe not ever. I don't know." "I understand," he whispered, looking at the floor. "But," I continued, "you're still my family. And you are a mess." I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. "I won't let you lose the house." They both looked up, shocked. "I'm not giving you money," I said quickly, holding up a hand. "I'm not the family fund. But the parts inventory, the specialty equipment I took from the warehouse, it's worth a lot of money. More than I need right now." I walked over to the storage area. "I'm going to sell some of it to Gerald Morrison. He'll pay top dollar. And I'm going to give you a loan. A formal, legal loan with an interest rate. Sophia, with your new business skills, you can draft the paperwork. You will pay me back $800 a month for 7 years. Sophia stared at me, her mind clearly doing the math. "Marcus, that's more than fair. That's generous." "It's not generous," I said. "It's business. It's the only way this family can ever move forward. On truth and on contracts." My father looked at me, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. Not as his failed project, but as an adult, as a professional, as someone worthy of respect. "Okay, Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Okay, business. I can do that." They left soon after. Sophia promised to email me a draft of the loan agreement. My father just gave me one last haunted look and walked out the door. The next day, I sold part of my specialty inventory to Morrison. He gave me an excellent price. I transferred the funds to my father's mortgage account, and the foreclosure was stopped. That evening, I received a meticulously detailed PDF in my email. Loan agreement, R. Chen and M. Chen. It wasn't a reconciliation, not a full one. I didn't go back for Sunday dinners. I didn't call my mother and pretend things were normal. But it was a start. Sophia and I started texting, not about the past, but about her business classes, about what she was learning. My father sent me a single text a month later. Payment sent. Thank you. My life was at Tommy's shop now. I had my own apartment, my own work, my own future. My machines were back where they belonged, and my grandfather's tools felt perfect in my hands. I was building a custom engine restoration for a collector, my first major commission as a junior partner. It was made of precision-ground steel and vintage components, and I knew, as I ran my hand over the perfectly machined surfaces, that it was going to roar. I had lost the illusion of the perfect family, but I had gained something so much more valuable. I had gained myself.